Thank you so much, Professor Kirshner, for this excellent summary of your book and the two theories and the what classical realism has to offer. So now we will ask Professor Jan to present his arguments and his talk. Professor Jan. You're muted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, and thank both Brigitte and Tiejun for you organize this wonderful opportunity for us to discuss about the general trend of the IR studies, IR theory studies. Well, just now, I think Professor Kirshner and strongly emphasized why and we should study how the actors, I mean states, to shape the international environment rather than only to concern how the environment driving the states to behave according to so-called rationalities. Well, I think I agree with most of his argument. And I think the fault of the structural realism is not its only problem concerning the environmental factor determines the state actors' behavior. Actually, in 1980s and 1990s, and the IR series dominated by the idea environmental elements determines actors' behavior. So structuralism only pick up the power structure at the system level, and the liberalism pick up the international institutions at the system level, and the constructivism pick up the so-called cultural structure, and by Alexander Wundt, also at the system level. So they argue from the same level, system level, to argue the environmental factors and driving the state to behave according to their force. So the difference is that what environmental factor they selected as an independent variable to explain the state's behavior. I think that's they made the same mistake. That means they concern environmental factors are determinative. Unfortunately, recently, the counter-globalization make all of the theories fail to explain. US is still the most dominating power in the world, and all of the international institutions mainly initiated by the United States, and the liberalism dominating ideology after the Cold War and initiated by the United States. Then why suddenly the American government no longer behave like before? Why American government stopped to pushing forward globalization, adopt a deglobalization policy, start from the Trump and continued by the Biden administration? Well, so you find that all of these system theory or the IR theories based on the system analysis level can no longer explain the most fundamental general trend of the current international politics. All of these environmental factors fail to explain why suddenly the major actors change their behavior when the environmental factors almost similar. So from my understanding, that's why the Kirshner is right to argue that, hey, we should considering the actors, they have the capability to make their own choice in the same international environment. When the international environmental factor didn't change at the system level, the states or the actors still can make different selections. That means they still have the role, playing the role of shaping international environment, right? Like that. Well, So when we're talking about the how the actors shaping the international environment, from my understanding, actually here I have a generally agree with that the actors will have a choice. They have the room to make their own choice for decision making. But then I think possibly just now Professor Kirshner make the rationality equals to the right, equals to the same policy selection. My understanding, rationality doesn't mean that because they have the same rationality, so they will select the same policy. No, they're rational the same, but they are in different situation. Strong, some countries have a stronger power than others. Some countries are weaker, and some countries have a different political system, and the other country have the another kind of political institution. And most important, they may have a different policy, different type of policy makers. For instance, just now, Professor Kirshner think the Mitch Hammer is wrong to concern the environmental and will make China decided, make China definitely will become the regional major hegemony. Actually, the fact has already shows that this argument doesn't hold water. In the last 2 years, China has issued 3 documents. One is a global development initiation. Second, global security a concept and a document. Third, very recently, and a global civilization and the initiatives. 3 documents, they jumped over from the regional hegemon to the competition with the US for the global leading positions. So they jumped over this. Why, from my understanding? This is no longer traditional age. That means we move into the digital age. In digital age, region no longer, the geopolitics no longer play that important role, have a less impact on policymakers' decision. And now their concern is because their policy concern is that how I have an influence or dominating role in the cybersecurity, in the cyberspace. Cyberspace is global. You can hardly have the regional cyberspace, right? So that's why nowadays geopolitical explanations can hardly explain a lot of current realities, because now China and the US compete in 2 spaces, natural spaces and cyberspaces. So these kind of competition in 2 spaces will be different. That means both US and China will make different choices from the Soviet Union and US during the Cold War. So that's why when Mr. Hammer concerned China and the US will compete like the US and the Soviet Union during the Cold War, that is wrong. That's that kind of geopolitical thinking can no longer analyze today's policymakers' behavior. So my understanding. So now that's why when we shape, we move from the system level analysis to the individual level analysis. We must consider why. From my understanding, there's one important reason. We find that at the group or state level, the actor behave differently in the same international environment at the system level. So now that's why we want to explain why when there's no fundamental change at the system level and the state at the group level change the behavior, we're looking for the reason or explanation at the individual level analysis. Then who are they? Policymakers. So that's why we'll find that policymakers make different choices in what? In the same environment. For instance, and Mitch Hammer was known for that, his prediction about Putin's policy towards Ukraine, right? Because he said, look at that, this is totally inconsistent with what the bipolar theory and the geopolitical theory. Wait a minute. How about Kennedy? And for the same strategic interests, and to prevent the rivalries deployed strategic weapons in their neighbor, and for Kennedy in Cuba, for Putin, for Ukraine, when they have the same strategic interests, but Putin and Kennedy adopt different approaches or strategies to achieve that goal. So Kennedy and trade with Khrushchev, and then get the missiles withdraw from the Turkey, and trade for Russian stop his plan to deploy the weapons in the Ukraine, in Cuba. And now you see the Putin's choice and same purpose, same strategic interest, and the same threat. Then he adopt a different approach. He prefer to change the regime through the military force. So these cases clearly illustrate that, and we must theoretically study policymaker at individual level. Certainly, we cannot study one by one, and every individual policymakers are different. If you have the specialty of every individual, there will be never to develop any theories. Then we study the type of leaders. And then we find one very interesting phenomenon. Before World War I, there's many countries have imperialist leaders. At World War II, there's many countries with fascist leaders. And after World War II, there's many communist leaders. In 1960s, there are many nationalist leaders. After Cold War, there's many countries with liberalist leaders. Now we have populist leaders and hold power in many major powers. Then we find that these populist leaders prefer what? Prefer deglobalization strategy. And the purpose is very clear, stated by all of these major powers as for their economic security. Actually, no one knows what is economic security. No definition. What's the border of the economic security? No one knows. What's the limit of the economic security? No one knows. But everyone said that I adopted all of these decoupling, deglobalization policy for what? For our national economic security. Well, that's my view. I don't know. I think economic security is purely based on populism ideology, populist ideology. What? Xenophobia's mentality, fear of foreign, any kind of foreign relations, economic, foreign investment, foreign technology, foreign culture, foreign tradition, and foreign people. Everything foreign is a scare, and every foreign is a threat. Anything foreign is a threat. So for their security, they will cut off all of the relations and the interactions with the foreign countries. So here, I think if we come to this populist, why at this moment have populist leaders and so popular in the world? I cannot give a very solid explanation, but I think there's one thing maybe we should concern is that where do the populism stemmed from? It seems to me it stemmed from where? From the globalization. That means counter-globalization grow out of globalization. Globalization make the international polarization worse and worse, both at the international level and the domestic level. Internationally speaking, and people are so proud to say, and G20 account for more than 80% of the GDP. What does it mean? It means the other 150 countries only share 15% of the GDP. So the global polarization in terms of wealth, the polarization at the global level increased dramatically. domestically, all of these major powers and benefit from globalization simultaneously have their domestic polarization grow very fast. And so the poor do not mean poor people becomes poorer than before, but they find that the wealth gap with the rich increase dramatically. So this kind of, and the people's dislike this kind of polarization, become the resentment of this liberal policy. And meanwhile, digital technology create the cyberspace. That means change the environment, becomes an environmental factor. And so the change of environmental factor means have redefined the major parts of strategic interests. For instance, the national security no longer means a territorial security. It also means a cyber security. And cyber security in some way becomes more important than territorial security, than maritime security. So the environmental factor do play the roles, but what's the role? It's the role define the strategic interests of the states, but it is not determines the strategy adopted by the policymakers to protect or achieve their national interests. That's why now for IR theories, we need to study the policymakers, how they choose their choice. In the digital technology, and actually make the digital economy grow very fast. Nowadays, digital economy grow 1.5 times faster than the global economy. That means the digital economy accounts a larger and larger share of the major parts of GDP. So in that way, you find that the population closely related with the digital economy, their wealth accumulate much faster than the people outside of the digital economy. So this also escalated the social polarization and at a domestic level, and certainly also international level. The last thing is that you find that the regime security is not only like a traditional concern, it's for so-called the authoritarian regime have the regime security problem. How about democracies? In democracies, the regime security also become problem. The typical case in the when Trump in the power, and the people try to deny the result of the election and by attacking the Congress. And so nowadays you find that even in Western countries, and the policymakers give first concern to what? To their regime security rather than national security. This is very populist in the idea. And they concern any foreign factors, elements, whether they will compose a threat to their regime security first. And the so-called the economic security and the same, based on this. So these also, when you concern let's think about it, when the foreign policy is mainly driven by the regime security concern rather than the national security concern, the uncertainty certainly will become increasing. Why? Because domestic security is much less stable than the regional security. We have less foreign threat cause of war is very rare, but domestically you have the regime change much faster and frequent than you have the international wars. So from my understanding, if I can wrap up, the uncertainty becomes the one of the major feature of the current global politics. And today, rather than during the post-Cold War period, and it is mainly because the counter-globalization replaced globalization. What do you mean uncertainty? Uncertainty means something undesirable, something bad happened. You didn't know, like the Professor Kirshner, something happened you don't know before. So something bad happened, you think it's uncertain. If something good, some luck fall on your head, you never say this answer, hey, this is good. Right? So something bad come to you, you said it's uncertain. When something good to you, you never say uncertain. Unfortunately, counter-globalization means bring more bad things to us, bring more breakdown of global supply chains, and bring more economic sanctions and decouplings and conflicts between countries. Globalization just opposite. Globalization creates more cooperations, more integrations between the major powers. But now the counter-globalization and reduce the cooperation between them, create more conflicts between them. That's why we consider the uncertainty is a major feature of the current world. And finally, I would say uncertainty, since uncertainty already become one of the important major feature of the current international powers, the IR theory really should to study about this phenomenon. Why is it happening today, but not 10 years ago, 20 years ago? When it started, uncertainty becomes so popular, and why before people do not fear about uncertainty. So I think this is today we really selected a very good topic for the future IR theoretical studies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Yan, for this impassioned argument of how to look differently at the field of